It's about internal coherence. And this particular student said, I'm very intrigued by this whole notion you keep on about internal coherence. So can I make it my first M.Ed paper? So his first 10,000 words were on internal coherence. So I said, okay, I will plan a day's work, because you need enough time to watch it. I'll plan a day's work, which is the most complicated one I can find on internal coherence. And I'll plan it along with you, so that you're happy with the material, but that you see the hazards I'm setting up, because I have to preserve the central coherence all the way through. So the result is this complicated day with 14-year-olds, I think, in a Ripon high school. Now, to make it really complicated then, and it always is if you've got teachers with you, I've got 25 teachers to teach at the same time as the children. So I've had to set it up to utilise them so they can understand internal coherence as well as Lance, because he's one of the group. So don't think that this would have to be done using 25 adults. It's been a bloody encumbrance having 25 adults. You know, underpaid to learn about it. So briefly, look at the plot line and then we'll look at the situation. A group of people will be treated as if they are students in a college which deals with horticulture. So from the very beginning I have to preserve for the children, we are students in a horticultural course approaching our finals. That's the first. We have, however, accepted a competition as part of our finals work, and that is to design an Italian garden. We're horticultural students. Seems reasonable that we would find ourselves designing an Italian garden. I cannot teach about Italian gardens, and yet we are going to be skilled at Italian gardens, is what we have to do. Remember, I'm making it complicated on purpose. I'm not suggesting you normally go on to this carry on. So, they first know they're horticultural students. They know that they are entering a serious competition, an international one. And it will be an 18th century Italianate garden that the British enjoyed making at that time for a country house. At the same time, this Italian garden will be set to replace, eventually when it's grown, it will replace an Italian garden that a lady once made. The lady who lived in this big house we're designing it for. So we're designing it to win a competition, but eventually it'll be grown in the garden of a big house and replace it for the National Trust. So we've got to know about the plants as well. And that Italian garden, when it has grown, will enable people to understand something about the family. The family who owned this house. The garden was grown to replace 2 dead children who died, and this was her monument to her children. So you see, we've got all these complications. How far can the garden help people understand when they look at the portrait? Yes, gardens grow about the pace of people. Trees mature slowly like people. Trees see things happen around them like people. And these trees, of course, are still replacing trees that were lost. Right. So that is what I have to try to preserve. So you just have a think about what branch of agriculture you're good at. Because in drama you can be good at it, can't you? You might as well be very good at it. So this is the cream class, you know, the top. Right? In my agricultural college. And we have 2 members of staff here. What department are you in charge of, Mrs. Roberts?
Growing orchids.
Growing orchids. You can tell that by the look of her, couldn't you? The way she talked then. She grows orchids. What are you into?
Horses.
Horses? Ah, yes. Any special breed?
Arabs.
Arabs. Yes, I wondered. Is that why they're building the new stables?
Yeah.
Good, good. What are you into, ladies? Cows as well, but a different section, presumably. Yes. I'm just thinking of a way in which you could use the word well as if it were the name of a town.
Wellington.
The Royal Wellington. I see what you mean, yes. The Royal Wellington Agricultural College. Well, how does it sound? The Royal Wellington Agricultural College. The Royal, well-established, Agricultural College. You could put a date instead of well-established if you wanted. The Royal 1695 Agricultural College. You see what I mean? So it sounds, gosh, they've been going a long time. So let's sort out now what we've got. We've got a college, we've got a lot of people who work there. We've got people in their final year whose work, whether it's on ducks, cows, orchids or whatever, goats, has been put forward, and we've won the opportunity to send one piece of work from the college, from you people, to win a large prize that will give the college a good reputation. And this is where Mrs. Heathcote has wished it on you, and I don't like doing that, but we haven't time. But we've decided that our entry for this big prize is to design an Italian garden. You see, it has to be that, because we can't use our real skills of cows and horses and sheep and pigs. We have to give ourselves a kind of test. What we need to do as we work is think of how many questions does this make us consider? You see, I'm beginning to think now, how long did they keep their grass? It looks a bit long there. How tall were these trees? So all the time I'm looking at it, I'm thinking up questions so that we can get our answers about an Italian garden as we go on. Now, there isn't a lot of room for you to work, but there's grass and trees and things that would make flower beds. I'm sure by this you can see how to continue it, can't you? Do you think you could get in a group and decide on a bit of the garden you'd like to work on, because you see we can move it, look, into 2 pieces if we want to give ourselves some space. So we can get going on with it. And every so often I shall say stop. Are there any questions in your mind that you feel you need the answers to before we could send it on to the exhibition? Like, I don't know what these trees are called. Do you see what I mean? So it's not an exercise in pretending to do clay, it's an exercise in making this garden, going on working at it, and there's all the material on the table there, and I'll keep saying what questions are rising in our minds, and I've got a notebook, and I shall make a note of the questions. Okay.
So the model, the half-made model that you
Yes, we
presented
prepared.
them with was a half-made version of it was the model that they were going to complete. It wasn't a model, a posher model of the previous Italian garden.
No.
It was a model of the one.
And it was the first Italian garden they probably had ever seen. I don't know, because I don't know the children. But it lays in the rules about Italian gardens, which later, when you look at the raw stuff, you'll see how much of that was understood by the children when they became the garden, who saw the children, who remembered how the woman was when she planted them. So it grew very deeply, but it started here. The trees here were the trees they became later in the day. Now always the children are empowered. Only they can lay a hand on the model. I can't lay a hand on the model. It is their model. Though I've had to explain why I've brought the garden at this point. So we'll go on a bit longer. Is this wearisome to you? I'm sorry it's not very easy to see. I'm already worried about how long the grass should be allowed to be. You know, what sort of level we should take our turf. Do you think I should put that down?
Yeah.
Length of turf. Any others?
Fern trees.
Pardon?
The fern trees.
Which do you mean?
The big one.
Yes. The evergreens?
Yeah.
Yes. Is it the names you mean, or the height, or
The height of them.
how big the trees ought to be? How's it coming on? Benches, did you say?
Yeah.
Some benches. Whether we can have benches. Oh. Yes, there's been a suggestion here we need statues. Statues. Well, one of the questions is, can we have statues in an Italian garden? That would be one of the things. And can we have benches, and if so, what sort? You see, a lot depends really on how big it is, you know. If it's very big, presumably people need rests. Do you think it might be possible to find out about the 19th century duck?
Yes.
In captivity, as you might say. I see. So, if we have ducks, we've got to check the duck variety. Right. Now, you've got a double problem here, because this is a very interesting thing, isn't it? When you're fiddling on with clay, it's grand. As you fiddle on with clay now, I'm going to treat you as fifth-year college students. You'd better that everything you put in your hand, let it teach you some questions about the garden. You can now breed those questions quite deliberately. You see what I mean? So if you say, oh, I've had an idea, we could put plant pots there, then you're being a designer. So you then have to go back to being a questioner and say, well, how many questions can I get out of that one? Are you used in drama to just finding yourselves, I've been in this place and now I'm in another place? Can you do that? in your own minds. All right, well, if you just do that switch in your head and just turn round, I'll come over and I think you'll know who I am. You're the party from the college, I understand. Oh, well, everything's ready for you. Thank you so much for being on time. I appreciate it very much. You're interested, I believe, in the Italian garden at Grantley? Yes. Is this for some project you're involved in or something? I see. Well, do come in and then tell me about it, what you're wanting to know, and I'll do my very best to help you.
What length should we have the grass at?
What length should the grass be? Yes, well, there may be something in the exhibition that would tell you that. I'm not absolutely certain, but as long as you know the question, you can see whether there is information there. Are there any other questions?
How deep the duck pond should be?
How deep the duck pond should be, yes. I don't know whether there is a duck pond at Grantley, or whether the Italians ever put duck ponds in their gardens. Of course, I'm not an expert in Italian gardens, but you should be able to check that out, I think. It could be quite crucial. I understand it's quite a big prize you're going for. How exciting for you. Are you going far? Is it far away you have to do this? Is it? I see. And is it in a tropical country or is it? How interesting. And the college, I suppose, is paying all the expenses?
Yes.
And you're representing your college? How marvellous. That's lovely. Are there any other questions that I need to...
How high the trees should be?
How high the trees should be at their full height, you mean, for the final design? Yes, there may be evidence of that in the museum. I'm not certain. Are there any other queries?
What kind of flowers there should be in the flower beds? Obviously on the flower beds.
Yes, I suppose. Are there flower beds, and if so, what flowers were there? Yes. Well, I'm sure that the garden at Grantley, I have a feeling anyway that there were some sort of beds like that. Any other queries before I take you forward? Well, we have a room set aside specially dedicated to the lady who made the garden at Grantley. And if you like to come forward, I can... this is the portrait. They say you can tell an awful lot from the portrait. I often come in here and look at her and wonder who painted her and gave her the background they gave her. What you wanting to know, and I'll do my very best to help again.
What length should we have the grass at?
Now, this is a very good example. What length should the grass be? It's a very good example of how the internal coherence, the outside is utterly changed, but the interior follows exactly the line. We began by declaring what we did in the college, which was just pure invention. We then designed the college name, which was a social agreement, a contract. The college now can be said to exist because the name suggests it's published. If you give it a name so that people can recognise it and where you come from. The third thing is we design a garden, or we work on a garden in order for the teacher to get the children to raise questions. And now the children are put in a position where their questions have to be declared, that they are genuine seekers after information. The first raising of questions, Mrs. Heathcote made it ever so easy. Mrs. Heathcote was heard talking more than the children were, because Mrs. Heathcote was spreading the news that you could be reassured that nobody's going to feel an idiot round here if they get any questions, because all questions are suitable questions. So Mrs. Heathcote has kept a record which later she might help you use again if you feel the need to rely on her. Now then, they have to be placed in a position in regard to this where there's a holding system. The input system has come from the garden, the actual thing standing in front of them. The talking about it, the writing down the questions is all part of the input system, not the keeping record holding system. We're coming on to the holding system now, which will give rise to the processing system. This allows the children to go back over their questions, and they are held into a deeper questioning through the dramatic process. In this case, they are visiting Grantley Hall, which really does exist. And this lady really did exist, that later they will meet. But you see, they've suddenly switched from looking at an Italian garden to handling baby clothes. The possessions that she carefully kept in the attics have become part of the museum and the history of this house. They will lead us to the tragedy. So, you see, one minute they're handling clay, and the next minute they're handling, the children were twins, a boy and a girl, because we had boys and girls in the past. The children's christening gowns. The diary of the lady, which has been written and broken into pieces, and all the clues to the tragedy are on that table. The story has not been told to them at all. They must create the story out of the fragments, which will enable them to understand the Italian garden, because they are students who are, so we go back on. So I think that's a very good example of changing the outside. The children are not fazed. Mrs. Heathcote wrote their questions. Mrs. Heathcote said, well, I think possibly these questions could only be answered at Grantley if we go to the hall. And I've done it the dramatic way by being in role. Now I'm sustaining that role. I've taken a big risk. They're only an hour into the day, and they're a very large class. And all the time, these people are standing with their paper aprons on, listening.
I wondered if there was any land attached to this garden, because the seeds, we think the seeds are such big quantities they couldn't have been to the garden.
2.5 bushels.
Oh, yes. And is that, what sort of seed is that?
Just bushels.
Yes. Oh, just bushels of seed, grass seed. Oh, yes. Well, they may have put some pasture down. I don't know. Because not all this may be to do with her Italian garden. It may have been to do with the estate.
An interesting thing happened about the diary. I don't know if you've tried it ever. We all wanted to make the diary because I wanted it to be part of teaching my course how to create documents. Documents which inform but do not tell and do not explain. But they inform if you reach into them. And so restraint is very important in creating documents. The 25 of us sat down to create a diary, and we said each one of us will make a page. And what we knew was the name of the lady, and we had invented the death of 2 children. That was the only bit we invented, the death of 2 children. Grantley Hall exists, the garden existed, and now re-exists. And so on. And we all sat down to do a page, and the only thing we agreed on was the date when the children were drowned. So we knew there was water running through the grounds. we could do sketches because I wanted it to be a Victorian, well, not a Victorian, but a sort of notebook ladies made when they had art lessons and did watercolouring. So whether we could or we couldn't, we did watercolouring. And there were patches of colour right through this diary. When we came to put it together, it was totally coherent. And we never consulted. Because, you see, none of us gave any direct information. What we gave was something that would enable the children to understand. So the diary was that stage of the crisis in her life and her decision to remember the children by creating the rearing of a garden rather than the rearing of a family. And you may think, well, that's a bit daft, but I don't think it is. If you need an occupation and you can't have more children and you wish to be involved, it takes a long time and occupies you.